sensor, then throttle sensor, then mass flow sensor, then accession sensor, NOx sensor, so oil pressure sensor and fuel pressure sensor. So as far as we are getting the analog input using the ADC and digital input using the digital to analog converter. So then in output side, these values are compiled and processed by the processor, that is microcontroller or some other uh, dedicated processor, which is get the data and it will convert into the control signals like that. It will given to the actuators, motors, fuel injection opener, that is throttle position valves, that solenoid valves, data bus drivers, like that. It will given the input to the process. So this is the engine management system with the sensors and actuators in this circuit. The set of instructions, that means if we want to start the engine, we need to first define the correct proportion of air and fuel and ignition. Okay, when fuel and air in the correct proportion, then only the when ignite the spark plug, it will then only the petrol will be ignited. Okay, then the air pressure will produce the pull and force the piston. Okay, this is the concept. Okay, so these are all controlled by the common electronic control unit. It will define the process which is done first, which is done first, last, like that. We need to define. So engine speed sensor. The engine speed sensor is an inductive type sensor used to measure or sense the engine speed. It consists of coil and C sensor wheel. When the teeth of the sensor wheel passes through the sensor, the inductance of the coil changes. This change in inductance produces an oscillating voltage. So engine temperature sensor. The engine temperature sensor is used to sense the temperature of the engine. It is actually a thermistor or thermocouple. The thermocouple consists of the bimetallic strip or thermistor whose resistance changes when there is a variations in temperature of the engine. So hardwire anemometer. So hardwire anemometer is used as a mass airflow rate sensor in which a heated wire gets cooled when air passes across it. The amount of cooling depends on the mass flow rate. Then accession sensor. The accession sensor is usually a closed end tube made of zirconium oxide with the porous platinum electrodes on the inner and outer surfaces. Let's see, when the temperature is above 300 Celsius, means the sensor becomes permeable to accession ions, so that melt edge will be produced between the electrodes. These are the conditions of accession sensor. Okay, let's see other sensors in this topic. So next, camshaft sensor. The camshaft sensor determines which cylinder is firing an established injector synchronization and coil firing sequence in DI system. Then only crankshaft sensor set ignition timing, supply the signal and measure the speed. So it is used to monitor the position and the rotational speed of crankshaft, and this information will be used by the EMS to control the ignition system timing and other engine parameters. So engine oil sense. It is measured the oil pressure inside the engine and gives an alert in case of any problem with the oil pressure. So already we discussed. So NOx sensor. This NOx sensor detect the engine knock and sends a voltage signal to the engine, and the engine uses the signal to control the timing. So MAP sensor. This sensor measures air pressure which tells engine the current attitude of the vehicle. Ideal air control valve, that is IACV. The ideal air control valve is also known as ideal speed control valve. Regulates the ideal speed of the engine. So accession sensor, that is the measure the proportion of accession of to fuel in the engine. So throttle position sensor. The sensors used to monitor the throttle position of the car. So the sensor moves with the throttle and sends a voltage signal to the computer, indicating throttle angle and speed of movement. The computers use this data to measure engine load, adjust timing, and fuel delivery. This is the concept we have done in the engine management system. Okay, that is electronic control unit. Using this control unit, we can effectively use the engine. Okay, thank you. We will see in the next class.